So this has been a long journey for me, and I want you to know that because most people dealing with chronic illness have experienced the same thing. They go doctor to doctor to doctor, one specialist to another, spending time, money, and energy on things that at best are band-aids that give you temporary relief. That's not what I share. Let's just get into it. So my childhood really wasn't that bad. I wasn't sick that often until I hit around age 12. I came down with this chronic cough that basically never went away. And it really affected what I could do during school. So I don't know where this came from because my parents definitely did not pressure me in any way, shape, or form. But I always had this drive to be top of the class, straight A student, had to be perfect. Because of that, I had a hard time, or partially because of that, I had a hard time doing any extracurricular things because I was getting sick all the time. Constant infections, headaches, antibiotics, steroids, you name it, I had it. This is a before and after picture of volleyball in middle school and then in high school. I remember this day very clearly. I did not feel good. I had a fever, like aches. It was a very low grade fever, which I didn't know at the time because I didn't realize that was happening every time I had body aches. It was basically a viral flare up, which we'll get into later. But you can see in my face that I did not look good. I felt like absolute garbage during this photo. And I ended up actually quitting the team shortly after this. This was like tryouts and stuff. And I made the team and I ended up having to quit because, well, I guess I chose to quit. I don't want to say I had to. I chose to quit because I was always missing volleyball games, like not being able to play, because if you were homesick the day or two before a game, you weren't allowed to play. I was missing so many games, it didn't make sense to even continue. I was basically going to practice just to sit on the bench half the time. I was honestly hoping just not to make the team because there were so many girls that were trying out that year. And when I made it, I was just like, I just got really emotional and wanted to cry because I had to tell the coach that I couldn't play. And then I didn't ever talk about how crappy I felt to anybody. So when they wanted to know why, it just sent me into like this puddle of tears. And I held it back as much as I could. But then I remember walking home disappointed in myself for having to quit because I'm not someone who likes to quit. And I really believe this was one of the first challenges in my life where I had to choose my health over taking on all these things that I knew my body could not handle. I wasn't able to live the life that I wanted to live. If it were up to me and I would have had the energy to do it all, I would have gotten the grades, I would have been in band, and I would have played volleyball. I wanted to be active. And when you get that choice taken away from you because you're chronically ill and the doctors can't tell you why, it is very emotional. You can bury the emotions, which I did for a very long time, and you can hide it, which I did. You don't tell your friends and family that you can't do things or you don't feel good. You just push through, which is what most people with chronic illness do because you don't want people to know, whether it's your friends, your family, or your boss. You don't want them to know, oh, well, don't hire me for this job because I might have to take half the month off because I have a migraine or I come down with the flu and everybody else gets the flu for 2 days, but for me, I end up in the hospital for 2 weeks. So it's something you don't really like to advertise. So that's how it all started out, but things got progressively worse where I was experiencing headaches, which I had in at least high school, maybe a little bit in middle school. I don't remember for sure, but I had headaches once in a while and then they got more frequent. And eventually I ended up having migraines in college where I remember my sister had to come pick me up from school because I didn't know what was going on, and my head hurt really bad, but that wasn't anything completely unusual, but it was worse than normal, but I couldn't see, my vision was going. And the test continued, I'd go doctor to doctor still. It slowed down a little bit in college because honestly, I was just sick of getting the same antibiotics, steroids, inhalers, decongestants, antihistamines. I mean, it was the same thing over and over, and after 5 to 10 years of that, you kind of lose your faith and hope and you just end up going to urgent care and getting a stupid antibiotic and moving on with your day. But deep down, I didn't want to take those. I knew it's not good for your digestive system. I knew it was harming the good bacteria in my body, but I didn't have a choice. I would be coughing up blood and having like sharp pains when I would breathe. And so I didn't have a choice. I'd end up in the hospital. Sometimes I'd pass out for no reason. My menstrual cycle was so painful that I would pass out. And that started in high school and continued through college. I remember sitting in class one day and I put my head down on the desk because I could feel it was coming. And, nobody knew what had happened. They just thought I was sleeping in class, being lazy. That's not what was happening at all. And so I'm just glad that I didn't fall out of the chair, because that would have been super embarrassing. And I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I just wanted to get through the class and go home. And so that was what it was like. And it was not predictable. Like, I would be okay for a couple weeks, and then a cycle would come and I would get burned out and wiped out and stressed out, and everybody else again would get the flu for 2 days, and I would end up in the hospital, or I'd have a fever and aches for 2 weeks and I'd have to go on an antibiotic. And even with that, I was still really fatigued for a couple weeks, if not a month after. And about the time I'm healing, it would start all up again. And so it was this never ending cycle. And I had another experience in college where that exact thing happened and it knocked me out. It was actually, I remember it was after I got the flu shot, which I had not had. Like, I didn't get that as a kid really. And then they kind of forced that upon us during our, once we got into pharmacy school, because we were going to be doing residencies and stuff in the hospitals. So I got it. I didn't really think anything of it. And I thought, well, I probably should get the pneumonia shot too, because I have, respiratory illness and history. And I got so sick, I had to make the decision to basically fail a class. I had to stop studying for that class because I couldn't catch up. My workload was too high. I thought about quitting my job, but I needed the money to pay my bills. And so I decided, and again, hardest decision ever at the time. I went back and forth on this for weeks, stressing myself out just about the decision alone. And finally I said, I can't do this. And I decided to let it go. And that decision, because of my health, cost me over $10,000, because I had to retake the class in the summer when I was stronger and healthier and not as stressed out. And also the cost of living. I had to pay for an apartment and electric and water and all that stuff for another whole semester because of that one class, because I got sick and couldn't bounce back like everybody else. And so I think that's part of the hardest thing about chronic illness, is not really being understood. Unless it's someone else that has chronic illness, they don't understand what it's like. And you don't really want them to, because then they just feel sorry for you. So it's hidden, and then you don't feel heard, and it doesn't feel fair. And it's very frustrating and very emotional. So on top of the cough and the chronic respiratory infections, I also had, and the headaches, I also had severe allergies, even on antihistamines and decongestants, like all year round. I would still sneeze. I'd go into work and sneeze nonstop for like 2 hours. It was terrible. You couldn't get anything done because you were just blowing your nose and washing your hands every 5 seconds. So that was horrible. Then I ended up, because of all the antibiotics, I ended up with yeast infections and a lot of digestive symptoms, which I blame the antibiotics for, but it also sort of runs in the family. So it's kind of like, well, was it just genetics, or, is it the antibiotic? Should I take probiotics? But I had a ton of constipation, diarrhea, bloating, gas, like just not feeling good, feeling really heavy, and not terribly painful most of the time, but it was just super uncomfortable. And so it was pretty much like that, just what symptom was going to ruin my day today kind of a feeling. And it's a bad attitude to have, but when that's your reality, it's hard to think about anything else. And so it was really challenging to make plans with anybody, because I never knew if, when the time came, I was going to be sick. and I wouldn't be able to go. And then I'd have to call them and, make up some excuse. Sometimes I'd tell them the truth. Sometimes I'd say, oh, well, my grandma's coming, or, something, I gotta go home, or, because you don't want to keep saying every time that you're sick. Like, who gets sick that often? It's not normal. And you don't want your friends to just disappear. So that is a big part of what I experienced as well. So let's jump forward. I made it through pharmacy school. Even though I knew that wasn't going to get me the answers I wanted, I continued, and that's a whole nother story for another time. I spent over $35,000 once I actually had money to spend on functional medicine doctors, chiropractic, physical therapy, massage therapy, Reiki energy work, NRT, Lifeline technique. This is just a small drop in the bucket of what I've tried. I put special filters on my house to filter out the air, and on our water, so that I wasn't getting the toxins and allergic reactions to things. I mean, I tore all the carpet out of the house. I did all the things somebody with respiratory issues would do. And I did get somewhat better, because I started changing my diet as well. I started going more towards a paleo keto diet, but I tried hundreds of different things in between there. And that really got me the best results, because it got me off of processed foods. It was more whole foods, even though it was a lot of grass-fed meats, grass-fed organic eggs, dairy, all of that stuff. So it was higher quality foods, and I did feel better. I wasn't getting sick as often. So I decided to have a baby. Thought everything was going to be fine. I really, truly did. It was not. I ended up having a C-section, and just after my son was born in spring of 2015, my body crashed. Like, my mom came to stay with me for a week. My husband took a week off of work, and it was a bad time, and that's a whole nother video. Like, my story could be 5 to 6 hours long if I gave you every detail. But let's just say all the symptoms I ever had, which was like 30 to 40 symptoms, came back all at once and were 10 times more powerful than they had ever been. So it was a real fun experience. I was having trouble breastfeeding because I was so exhausted and fatigued and getting sick, and antibiotics again. And that was an issue because you can't take a lot of these meds when you're trying to breastfeed. So it was a very stressful and depressing time, because I didn't feel like I was good enough to be a mom. I didn't feel like I was raising him the way I wanted to. And it wasn't my plan. And here I was again, a victim to my chronic illness. So what happened? Again, I changed my diet. I was kind of doing the paleo keto thing because that's what my husband was doing. And of course, he lost a ton of weight with it. He was working out, let's be honest here. I was not. I didn't have the energy for that. And so I didn't have the energy to even do a full-time job. I had reduced my hours at this point in time because I didn't feel safe to even go to work. So my intuition was telling me, look into plant-based, look into plant-based. And I did, and I had a plan, and I was gonna start it. But then my husband did this challenge with his gym, and I was like, you know what, I'm so exhausted. I don't have the energy to do this and figure out new foods, and I don't wanna be eating salad. I'm not a rabbit, blah, blah, blah. I don't wanna do that all day. I'm just gonna do what you did because I felt better before on that, so maybe if I just go back to that, it'll work. Yeah, it didn't. It was terrible. It caused massive constipation. I was already constipated, and hemorrhoids and fissures, and it was not a fun time. And there was absolutely no libido for over a year, which was frustrating to my husband as well. Not that he ever pressured me with that or anything, but it made me feel guilty because I wasn't who I really truly am deep down. I was being held back by something that it seemed out of my control. And so I continued to look for answers. I slowly started going plant-based. And then in 2016, I got a book that was very outside of the box for me by a man named Anthony William, who calls himself the medical medium. And I know some of you are gonna be like, nope, I'm out right now. Like, medical what? I don't think so. And that's totally fine. But I'm going to ask you to be open-minded for just a minute and let me tell you about my experience, because it changed my life in 4 days. 4 days. I am not exaggerating. I am not making up facts that are not true. This is exactly what happened to me.